This week, the aftermath of the great victory at Gettysburg. How the Union capitalized on their amazing victory. Will Meade press his encirclement of Lee? And what of the action in the West? Will Grant finally squeeze Vicksburg into capitulation? And will Port Hudson fall to Banks, allowing for the Union to freely sail the greatest river they could possibly have, the Mississippi? But before all of that, the major campaign I didn't mention in the intro. Major General William S. Rosecrans has taken his Army of the Cumberland and masterfully outmaneuvered General Braxton Bragg and his Army of Tennessee. The rebels were forced to the Elk River, outnumbered and surrounded. On the 30th, Bragg ordered a withdrawal across the river. This is controversial, as the Union Army is planned to assault on the 1st. Either Bragg missed the opportunity to badly bloody and repulse General Rosecrans, or he saved his army from its complete destruction. Upon crossing the Elk, Bragg holds a council with his two corps commanders, Lieutenant General Polk and Lieutenant General Hardee, who tell him to move further south to Cowan. These three men are usually at each other's necks, but Bragg listens to his subordinates, and his army begins their march. The resolute and well-conceived Union advance and the constant carping and non-cooperation of his generals seem to have broken Bragg down, physically and emotionally. Cowan is a terrible position for the rebels, so Bragg, without consulting his officers, marches towards Chattanooga, crossing the Tennessee River and narrowly escaping the division of Major General Philip Sheridan. By the 7th of July, the Army of Tennessee is camped at Lookout Mountain, overlooking Chattanooga. Thus ended a 9-day campaign, which drove the enemy from two fortified positions and gave us possession of Middle Tennessee, conducted in one of the most extraordinary reigns ever known in Tennessee at that period of the year. Extraordinary doesn't just define the reigns, but also General Rosecrans' brilliant strategy, although it doesn't get the recognition it deserves. Lee's army overthrown, Grant victorious, you and your noble army now have a chance to give the finishing blow to the rebellion. Will you neglect the chance? Just received your cheering telegram announcing the fall of Vicksburg and confirming the defeat of Lee. You do not appear to observe the fact that this noble army has driven the rebels from Middle Tennessee. I beg in behalf of this army that the War Department may not overlook so great an event because it is not written in letters of blood. Let us now turn to Grant's victory and the fall of Vicksburg. If you remember, during the final week of June, the Union unleashed a failed assault through a crater. Well, on the 1st, another mine is detonated, and on the 2nd and 3rd, Union engineers try to expand the breach, so regiments can march through. While this is preoccupying those on the battleworks, in the city of Vicksburg, things are even more desperate. Water is rare, and food is non-existent. People take to eating rats, and unsurprisingly, the city is a hotbed of illnesses. Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton not only has an army to deal with, but also the citizens of Vicksburg. He had hoped that General Joseph E. Johnston would relieve the city from Major General Ulysses S. Grant and his Army of the Tennessee. But by July 1st, General Johnston and his relief army were only camped outside of Big Black River. General Pemberton does not have faith that relief is coming and opens up communications with General Grant. Pemberton tells Grant he can hold out for much longer, a blatant bluff. But for the humanitarian efforts of saving lives, that he believes it best that a commission should be formed to decide terms of surrender. Grant will not take such a stupid deal. A commission made up of the stronger army and the besieged on equal footing? No. This useless effusion of blood you propose, stopping by this course, could be ended at any time you may choose, by the unconditional surrender of the city and garrison. Neither side wants to give an inch, but also neither man wants to continue this battle. They both walk out of their encampments, and at 1500 hours, the two former friends meet face to face. Ulysses wishes to keep up his record from Fort Donelson as unconditional surrender Grant. But he realizes that feeding and transporting the 30,000 men who garrison the city would be a monumental and cumbersome task. He relents his position, and without making promises, agrees to write that night his final terms of surrender. When I returned to my headquarters, I sent for all the corps and division commanders with army immediately confronting Vicksburg. Half the army was from 8 to 12 miles off waiting for Johnston. I informed them of the contents of Pemberton's letter, my reply, and the substance of the interview. I was ready to hear any suggestions, but would hold the power of deciding entirely in my own hands. This was the nearest approach to a council of war I ever held. Against the general and almost unanimous judgment of the council, I sent the following letter. In conformity with the agreement of this afternoon, I will submit the following proposition for the surrender of the city of Vicksburg, public stores, etc. On your accepting the terms proposed, I will march in one division as a guard, take possession at 8 a.m. tomorrow. As soon as rolls can be made out, rolls be signed by officers and men. would be allowed to march out of our lines, the officers taking with them their sidearms and clothing. In the field, staff, and cavalry officers 1 horse each. The rank and file will be allowed all their clothing, but no other property. If these conditions are accepted, any amount of rations you may deem necessary can be taken from the stores you now have, also the necessary cooking utensils for preparing them. 30 wagons also, counting 2 2-horse or mule teams as 1, will be allowed to transport such articles as cannot be carried along. Same conditions will be allowed to all sick and wounded officers and soldiers as fast as they become able to travel. Paroles for these letters must be signed, however, whilst officers present are authorized to sign the roll of prisoners. Parole, not capture. This allows for the rebel soldiers to go home on the condition that they don't fight again. It's always a risky endeavor. The positive for the Union are that they don't have to feed or clothe them as prisoners, or transport them, or watch over them. But there's always the chance they will break their parole, and even if they don't, they can help the CSA on the home front. Pemberton accepts these terms of surrender, and on Independence Day, Major General John Logan from the 17th Corps peacefully leads his division into Vicksburg. The Army of Mississippi lines up to be placed on the parole roll by an old oak tree, where Grant and Pemberton again talk. 31,000 rebels are put on the parole list. They surrender to the Union 170 cannons and 60,000 rifles. The Vicksburg campaign that went from November 1862 to July 4th, 1863 is over. The Union lost a little over 10,000, the rebels a little over 40,000. With the fall of the city, the Army of the Tennessee can turn its attention elsewhere, with Major General William T. Sherman being dispatched to take on General Joseph E. Johnston. Grant doesn't fall with Sherman, instead ensuring that the surrender goes as planned. Men who have shown so much endurance and courage as those now in Vicksburg will always challenge the respect of the adversary and, I can assure you, will be treated with all the respect due to prisoners of war. Our soldiers were no sooner inside the lines than the two armies began to fraternize. Our men had had full rations from the time the siege commenced to the close. The enemy had been suffering, particularly towards the last. I myself saw our men taking bread from their haversacks and giving it to the enemy. They had been so recently engaged in starving out. It was accepted with avidity and with thanks. Wow, so heartwarming. Almost makes you forget these men were trying to kill each other. With Vicksburg captured and Sherman in the east, what could possibly threaten Grant? Lieutenant General Theophilus H. Holmes wishes to relieve pressure from the garrison at Vicksburg, unaware that while he plans, Pemberton and Grant are agreeing on terms of surrender. He has 7,500 men and a target, Helena, Arkansas. It's a good target, an important city on the Mississippi, being situated on heights overlooking the major waterway. These heights are Crowley's Ridges, and they are beasts to climb. The Union encamped there and created a semicircle of fortifications, with 4 batteries placed in their line, and the USS Tyler in support. Major General Benjamin Prentiss commands the Union force in Helena, which used to number 20,000, but after reinforcements were recently sent to Vicksburg, numbers closer to 4,100. His district of East Arkansas is about what you would expect for a garrison: some cavalry, some artillery, and a single colored unit, the 2nd Arkansas. With him is the far more experienced Brigadier General Frederick Salomon and his division from the 13th Corps. Salomon, fun fact, is one of the highest ranking Jews in the Union Army. Lieutenant General Holmes' plan is for General John Marmaduke and his 1,700 cavalry to take the heights northwest of the town, with Brigadier General Lucius Walker supporting. General James Fagan and his 1,300 infantry take the area southwest of the town, and finally for Major General Sterling Price, with 3,100 men to storm the center at Graveyard Heights. Holmes tells his men to attack at daylight, something everyone misinterprets. On the morning of the 4th, Brigadier General John S. Marmaduke is in his saddle, watching his men, when he comes across felled trees. The enemy knows they're coming, and they're ready. He and his men cautiously continue their advance until they hear the shot of cannon and a shell bursts overhead. The battle has begun. Marmaduke deploys his men in line and begins their advance, sustaining small arms fire and cannon shot which rakes his line. But what is really disturbing is that his left flank is being enfiladed. Where is Walker? Walker decided it was too dangerous for him and his men to advance and called off his assault without informing Marmaduke, who was held at bay and taking serious casualties. To the southwest, things are also going terribly for Holmes' assault. General Fagan is being pinned by a Union battery that should be engaged with General Price's assault. Where is Price? Unlike Walker, he isn't hiding, merely waiting for sunrise to begin his advance. Canister shot cuts down men of Fagan for an hour before Price begins his advance. His line marches under musket shot and artillery shells. They near the Union before well-placed rifle fire turns them away. They rally, regroup, and are repulsed. Ulysses Tower has been firing its heavy guns in strong support, and the Union batteries are cutting apart Price's regiments. He needs to take those batteries. He charges once again, and after sustaining volleys, his men reach the summit and chase off the Union, capturing their cannons, which are disabled. Holmes arrives on Graveyard Heights and orders piecemeal assaults, which are unexpectedly, who am I kidding, very expectedly, beaten back. As Ulysses Tower continues its fire on the Confederate positions, Holmes decides to fall back, a crushing and costly defeat. The Union suffered 206 casualties to the Confederates' 1,636. Also on the 4th, Brigadier General John Hunt Morgan, who was raiding Indiana, is defeated in the Battle of Tebbs River. There, 200 Union infantry of the 25th Michigan repulsed 1,000 cavalry for hours, forcing Morgan to withdraw. The next day, he's again repulsed at Lebanon. On the 9th, Morgan secures a costly victory at Cordon, defeating 400 men of the Indiana Legion with 1,800 cavalry, but it took him time and manpower that he can't easily spend. Major General Ambrose E. Burnside's a familiar face and facial hair commands the Department of the Ohio. He dispatches thousands of men to capture Morgan. By the 16th, they are closing in on the rebels. Then there's the adventures of Major General William T. Sherman. After the fall of Vicksburg, he was sent to take on General Joseph E. Johnston. On the 5th, he departed with the 9th Corps, but as he rides, he is joined by the 13th Corps, the 17th Corps, and a detachment from the 16th Corps. Johnston falls back all the way to Jackson, Mississippi, where on the 10th, he is put to siege. Union artillery opens fire, hounding his force of 30,000 with cannon shot. On the 12th, Major General Edward Ord ordered Brigadier General Jacob G. Lawman to deploy his forces and charge the enemy. Lawman fumbles the order and his assault is repulsed at a high cost. On the 16th, he is relieved of command. And the same day, Johnston falls back from Jackson, Mississippi, giving it to the Union. Sherman suffered 1,000 casualties to Johnston's 1,331. Now, let's turn further south to the siege of Port Hudson. Major General Franklin Gardner and his Confederate forces spent the first week of July raiding the besieging 19th Corps under Major General Nathaniel P. Banks, which had been successful, capturing Brigadier General Neil Dow and burning the major supply hub of General Banks. There haven't been anything the Union can't handle. Gardner, getting increasingly desperate, tries to countermine under the Union line, but causes no casualties. Gardner looks at his men, starving, disease-ridden, and on the verge of mutiny. He then receives word that Vicksburg just fell. He surrenders to Banks on the 9th, having his men paroled. Banks suffered 5,000 killed or wounded, and another 5,000 went to disease. He paroles 5,935 Confederates and takes 405 of the officers captive. Gardner, during the battle, lost around 750 men to conflict and disease. Banks does not receive the applause and recognition he believes he deserves, being overshadowed by Meade and Grant. I'm sure he and Rosecrans could have a nice barroom conversation commiserating over how life is unfair. Though to further hurt Banks' reputation, on the 12th and 13th, 2 of his divisions were beaten back by only 2 Confederate brigades, suffering 430 casualties to the rebels' 33. Let's now turn to the man taking all the fame, Major General George G. Meade. He has General Lee surrounded at Williamsport. He holds accounts of war, and a majority of his officers don't want to fight, believing they don't have enough information. On the 13th, Meade and his chief of staff, Major General Andrew A. Humphreys, rides around the rebel defenses and finds them well guarded. He orders for the 14th a reconnaissance in force. Lee watches as the Union camps itself in front of his line.
That is too long for me. I cannot wait for that. They have but little courage.
On the night of the 13th, he withdraws his army across the Potomac. On the 14th, Meade realizes what has happened and quickly dispatches orders to pursue the Confederates. Unfortunately, they got a good head start on him, so it'll be tough. Only the cavalry really stands a chance of catching up on the Army of Northern Virginia. But they do it. General Buford and General Kilpatrick take their cavalry command and strike at Major General Henry Heth's division, charging through it twice, mortally wounding General James J. Pettigrew and taking anywhere from 500 to 2,000 prisoners. When the news of Lee's withdrawal reaches the White House, there is great anger.
We had them within our grasp. We told to stretch forth our hands, and they were ours. And nothing I could say or do could make the army move.
Proverbial that counsels of war never fight. On the 16th, Union cavalry under General David Gregg skirmishes with the rebels, but it's clear to all present that unfortunately Lee has slipped away to fight again. The same day, a minor but important battle on the coast of South Carolina. You see, the Union is trying to take Fort Wagner. After a failed assault by the 7th Connecticut, they take time trying to sweep up Confederate threats in the area. The 10th Connecticut is dispatched to try to ensure Union dominance at Gribble's Landing, but they are soon encircled and close to being overrun. One, the 54th Massachusetts Infantry. Yes, the colored infantry under Colonel Shaw saved them. Bali Island, South Carolina, July 18th, 1863. We're on a march to Fort Wagner to storm it. We have just completed our successful retreat from James Island. We fought a desperate battle there Thursday morning. 3 companies of us, B, H, and K, were out on picket about a good mile in advance of the regiment. We were attacked early in the morning. Our company was in the reserve when the outposts were attacked by rebel infantry and cavalry. I was sent out by our captain in command of a squad of men to support the left flank. Bullets really rained around us. When I got there, the poor fellows were falling down around me with pitiful groans. Our pickets only numbered about 250 men, attacked by about 900. It is supposed by the line of battle in the distance that they were supported by the reserve of 3,000 men. We had to fire, retreat toward our own encampment. One poor sergeant of ours was shot down alongside of me. Several others were wounded near me. God has protected me through this first fiery laden trail, and I do give him the glory and enter my praises onto his holy name. My poor friend, Sergeant Peter Vogelsang, is shot through the lungs. His case is critical, but the doctor says he may probably live. His company suffered very much. Poor good and brave Sergeant Joseph D. Wilson of his Company H, after killing 4 rebels with his bayonet, was shot through the head by the 5th one. Poor fellow. May his noble spirit rest in peace. The general has complimented the colonel on the gallantry and bravery of his regiment. While God may have protected the 54th, suffering only 14 killed, 17 wounded, and 12 missing, the same can't be said of their families. New York City, the biggest metropolis in America, a melting pot of immigrants, free blacks, and the traditional upper-class elite. A beautiful and corrupt political state. Enough tension to create a diamond. All it would take for the town to burn itself to the ground is a little spark. July 13th, the second draft is called. After the Conscription Act was passed by Congress in the spring, each state is responsible for supplying men, even those individuals don't want to go. The first draft, just 2 days earlier, was peaceful, but as the Provost Marshal gets ready to conscript some future U.S. soldiers, he sees 500 angry citizens approaching him, led by firemen. But they aren't here to put out fires, but start them. A brick comes crashing through the Provost Marshal General's window, followed by flames. The building catches fire, and the blaze spreads. Other firefighters come to the scene to stop the fire, but the mob turns on them, smashing their equipment, killing their horses, and using violence to keep them from the blaze. The rioters try to keep news of their illegal outbursts from spreading outside, cutting telegraph lines, but the police soon arrive, ready to stop this miniature rebellion. The New York State Militia has left the city to help at Gettysburg, and that leaves only the Metropolitan Police, which is not an adequate replacement. The police aren't the military. The superintendent, John Alexander Kennedy, who is out of uniform, comes to the scene. He is spotted immediately and beaten to an inch of his life. The force, seeing their leader being brought to death's door, take out their revolvers and clubs and charge the mob, trying to secure the body of Kennedy. He has suffered 70 knife wounds, but will survive. The police are soon overpowered and forced to retreat. The U.S. Army Invalid Corps, made up of people being unable to serve, ironic given how this whole thing started, arrives on the scene following the noble sacrifice of the police. They are a single company. Their commander orders the mob to disperse. They don't listen to him. His company lines up and readies their rifles. He fires a volley into the mob. The rioters turn on him and his men, charging. wounding 14 men, and one is missing, presumed dead. The 500 move around, not burning the mayor's office only because of a speech, but do destroy police offices. But this isn't just mindless destruction. Well, it is. But the mob also targets newspapers. The New York Tribune and Times have their officers surrounded. The Times, though, doesn't mess around, with their co-founder, Harvest Raymond, manning a Gatling gun, which turns away the mob. More police arrive and more join the mob. Police shoot a rioter. The rioters lynch African Americans. They destroy businesses that serve black customers and a black orphanage. For those progressive whites, the mob strips them and beats them. By the night of the 13th, many bodies litter the city, burning buildings only extinguished by the rain. The 14th, the riot starts again, burning down the homes of amalgamationists, 2 white women who married African Americans, and a prostitute that works with black men. As the mob turns to burning down abolitionist houses, Governor Horatio Seymour meets with the rioters, agreeing that the conscription was unconstitutional, but asked them to return home and disperse. This act of concession is not the only thing done. Major General Johnny Wool, the oldest general in service, commander of the Department of the East, asks for the militia to return, sends in 800 Marines to contain the city. The 15th, Robert Nugent, Assistant Provost Marshal General, orders that conscription be suspended after receiving word from Colonel James Barnett Fry, his superior. This dissuades many rioters, but some still take to the streets, but are soon opposed by the men of General Wool, who's forced to start pushing the mob in. The 16th is the final day of riots, with engagement at Gramercy Park. I'm sure New Yorkers will yell at me for that, where multiple federal regiments, howitzers, and militia engage with the mob and end the riot. The riot killed 120 people, primarily African Americans, who were lynched. Then there is Sickles. He has lost a leg, but not his spirit. Always a champion of the sciences and arts, thinks of a gift. There is a directive from the Army Surgeon General. Specimens of morbid anatomy, together with projectiles and foreign bodies removed. They are to be forwarded to doctors so they can study them. He loves his leg like a child he never had. He puts it into a small coffin and writes a note. With the compliments of Major General D.E.S. Then we shall end the week. This isn't really only 1 week, it's 2. I'm not covering 2 weeks. And let's look at the politics of the war. Rosecrans has been snubbed by the victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg.
The flanking of Bragg at Shelbyville, Tullahoma, and Chattanooga is the most splendid piece of strategy I know of.
If any student in the military art desired to make study of a model campaign, let him take his maps and General Rosecrans' orders for the daily movements of his campaign. No better example of successful strategy was carried out during the war than the Tullahoma campaign. None of that matters, though. It's without a major engagement and without a major prize. Gettysburg broke Lee's army, and while it survives to fight again, it is badly bloodied. Grant has secured the Mississippi and captured thousands. Another who is angry with the politicking of the U.S. Army is Major General Nathaniel P. Banks, but I am far less sympathetic to him. He suffered greatly against very few enemies. The only good thing I can say about him is his use of the U.S. colored troops. One thing I'm glad to say is the black troops at P. Hudson fought and acted superbly. The theory of Negro inefficiency is, I'm very thankful at last, thoroughly exploited by facts. We shall shortly have a splendid army of thousands of them. The severe test to which they were subjected, and the determined manner in which they encountered the enemy, leave upon my mind no doubt of their ultimate success. With all these Union victories, I can say that my paranoia of defeat has been abated. These weeks have been non-stop blows to the Confederacy, and they have been put on the back foot. The question now for Jefferson Davis is, can his economy and industry survive these defeats, or will the bloody water drown his breakaway nation? Hi, it's the entire Civil War Week by Week team here. I would just like to thank everyone for their glowing support with Gettysburg. That was a huge undertaking, and I'm glad to see that you guys truly appreciated it. I feel like now I should link to, I don't know, something like a Patreon or anything, but honestly, guys, just thank you. Over the course of 2 years, I have gone from a guy talking in his bedroom about the Civil War to no one, to a guy talking about the Civil War in his mother's basement to a couple hundred people, so that's a step up.